Welcome to Conscious Insights, Strategies for Leadership Evolution. Engage in roundtable discussions that spark deep dialogue with executives and thought leaders to advance conscious leadership and explore innovative practices. Join us and gain insights that will elevate your leadership journey. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Conscious Insights. This is another fun one. We're going to talk about one of my favorite tools with some amazing experts in this. I don't know if you want to call it a tool or maybe a way of being, but this is about wisdom of the ages, the Enneagram's power, and leadership transformation. And we want to talk today about how the Enneagram shapes transformative leadership across generations. And this was a perfect thing when you're going to learn that I'm an Enneagram 7, that my earphone just fell out right in the middle of the introduction. But I have two amazing experts in the work of the Enneagram. And how I generally do this is I've come up with a topic and then know people that are really doing great things in this work. And so I'll talk a little bit about Claire. And then I asked Claire to invite someone else that she knows that's doing great things in this work. And then we'll talk about the Enneagram. And so she invited Pastor Stephanie Williams. So let me quickly introduce my guests and then let's hop right in. So Claire Williams is an executive coach, writer, and speaker on a mission to merge the profound and the practical. She has developed thousands of leaders from managers to the C-suite in dozens of organizations across 5 continents, including Target, McDonald's, and Marriott. Claire's superpower is making transformational concepts like vertical development and the Enneagram digestible and actionable for leaders and teams. She holds a master's in organizational development and change, as well as a graduate certificate in executive coaching. And she's certified as a professional certified coach through the International Coaching Federation. Welcome, Claire. And Pastor Stephanie. Thank you. Pastor Stephanie Williams O'Brien is the lead pastor at Mill City Church in Northeast Minneapolis. She's also a professor of ministry and communications at Bethel Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. Stephanie has opportunities to coach leaders around the world through speaking and developing resources, and her podcast, Lead Stories, with her friend Joe Saxton. Her and Joe lead the annual Women's Leadership Intensive. Is it called the Easer Collective? Yep. Hosted at her church in Minneapolis. And she's the author of 2 books, Stay Curious, How Questions and Doubts Can Save Your Faith, and her latest book, Make a Move, How to Stop Wavering and Make Decisions in a Disorienting World. So perfect timing and perfect people for this topic to talk about transformation and the Enneagram. And so let's talk a little bit about what the Enneagram is. This is an ancient tool, really, that we are using in modern times. And so I'd love for you all to define, how do you define for our audience, what is the Enneagram?
So I'll share a bit about, what is the Enneagram? What are we talking about here? It's kind of a weird word. The word Enneagram actually means a symbol with a symbol of 9. So that's Ennea's 9, gram is symbol. So that's where the term comes from. There is a symbol. If you Google Enneagram right now, you'll see that there's a symbol that's a circle with some lines in it. And that is all part of the ancient history of this tool. It comes out of ancient wisdom traditions. There's a lot of mystery kind of surrounding exactly where it originated and the different forms it's taken over the centuries. But in the last 200 years or so, it's really kind of reemerged and become more public. First in some sort of esoteric groups that were using it, and then it leaked out, and now it's on Instagram. So everybody knows the Enneagram. If they're on the internet for any amount of time, you've at least probably heard the word. But it is, in its current form, it's a system of understanding personality as a defensive structure. So as a survival mechanism. And so personality, according to the Enneagram, is a mask that we all put on early in life in order to help us survive and make our way in the world. And that mask, that personality, serves us really well in our first half of life, said roughly. It may not actually be, half of your life, but childhood, early adulthood, we need the personality. And then in our adult years, second half of life, our task of development is really to deconstruct the personality, to not be so hooked to those defensive strategies as the only way of being in the world. And so the Enneagram actually reveals to us what is the personality strategy that you've adopted, and how have you allowed that to kind of define you and limit you. And learning your type is really just the beginning of a journey to deconstruct that and unhook from it, so that you're more free to use a range of ways of being in the world, ways of relating to yourself and to others. And of course, ways of leading, because you can imagine our personality as a defensive structure means that's usually what comes out sideways when we get reactive or when we have blind spots. So it's all about taking what is unconscious and making it conscious so we can work with it more.
I love that. And, when I talk about conscious leadership, and when we talk about vertical development and this work we do with leaders, I mean, that's essentially what we're doing, and why Enneagram is also such a great tool. Is we're saying these things made you successful today, and how are they limiting you? What's next for you? So I love that you bring that up, because the Enneagram is a real theoretical underpinning of all of that, of how we grow into consciousness. Would that be another fair way of saying it?
Yes, it absolutely would be.
Yeah. And Stephanie, I'm really curious, as Claire explained what the Enneagram is to her, what is it to you as well? And how do you use it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, as Claire described, it coming out of these ancient wisdom traditions, which is, exactly what Christianity came out of, the ancient wisdom traditions of Judaism and the wisdom teachers that have been teaching for so long. And so there's just a real easy kind of coming together of the understanding of yourself, but also holistically. And so the Enneagram is one of the best I would say the best personality tools, of which there's others out there, many of which that are much more recent and don't have the same like historical, roots, where it really brings in the whole person. So we're looking at somebody holistically, their spirituality, how they engage, the things that get them off track from who the best version of themselves might be. And then also that kind of really digging into your ego and your personality and figuring out what is it that is the true self in there. And I just think that goes hand in hand with spirituality in general. It goes really well, in my opinion, with Christianity and the way of Jesus. And so it's been really a great tool for me, for my church, for many people in my community, and for me as a leader, leading a team of leaders, other pastors that lead under me at my church, recognizing that we're all in those different spaces. My team's actually really intergenerational. And so as Claire was describing kind of the different work that the Enneagram plays in your life, I think about those folks that are under 30, and then those that are up in their, even 60s that are on my team, and the different work that they're engaging in. And my posture of leadership with them is, of course, that they've got roles that they play on our team and in our organization. But my hope for leading them as their manager and as their leader is that they would see that I care about their whole person and their whole self, and how they're engaging with that and integrating their faith and their spirituality with all of that. And then I think for me as a leader, who I am typed as a Enneagram 8, and that was not a difficult thing for me to come to as a conclusion, because I was in my earlier part of life in my 20s when I first encountered the Enneagram. But I think for me, it's just been crucial to be a healthy leader, to be able to be someone who stands up every week and encourages people to be honest with themselves and with God. Man, you got to be willing to do that yourself. And every tool that can help you do that is going to be excellent. But the Enneagram has been probably the most helpful for me in my own understanding of myself, the things that I can easily fall into that I know don't bring out the best version of myself, and just the constant commitment that I have to the inner work that I would hope that everybody in my congregation is willing to be open to, but I need to be doing that myself, of course.
Yes, absolutely. That's what makes great leadership, right? And great coaching. If we're doing this work ourselves, and then we're walking along other people doing the work as well. And I think it's hard to lead without doing that, and to coach without doing that. Maybe we each talk about you guys talk about your type, but then could we briefly talk about, I know there's 9 types, but is there like a sentence for each one, just so we can help people along? And then
they should give their sentences.
Yeah, that would be so fun.
I love that.
Okay, so
For someone who knows as much as she knows, to have to reduce it to a sentence is a real feat.
I'll do my best.
Yeah. So there's 9 numbers. You've got 3 out of the 9 on the podcast, on the video here. So I'm a 7.
Yes.
I talked about that. Claire, what are you? I might know, but
Yeah, I'm a 3.
The 3. What does that mean?
Well, a 3 is part of the heart triad. So one thing we haven't talked about yet is that Enneagram is divided into divisions of 3 in multiple ways. One of those ways is head types. There are 3 of them. You're one, Renelle, 6, 7, 5, 6, and 7. Heart types, which is 2, 3s, and 4s, and then body types. That's what Steph is. So we've got all 3 centers of intelligence represented here. So 8s, 9s, and 1s are body types. And what that means is essentially one of those ways of taking in information and processing information and acting in the world. We process and then act from one of those centers more than the other 2. So for me as a heart type, you might think that means I'm really emotional. And I actually think I am deeply emotional, but it's covered up by a lot of things. So don't mistake heart type as super touchy-feely. It might look like that, but it might not. Heart type actually means I am really driven by how others see me and experience me. And does their perception of me match how I want my image to be seen? So that's true for 2s, 3s, and 4s. For 3s, it particularly means I'm interested in being seen as successful and competent, like I got it all together. So 3 is like the overachiever performer type. Now there are subtypes, which we'll save maybe for later in the conversation if there's time. But the manifestation of each of these types looks different from person to person. And one of those factors is that there are actually subtypes within each type. So I'm a funky type 3, and then I'm a self-preservation 3. It's called the counter type, which means I'm a 3 that kind of doesn't want to be a 3, or I don't want people to see me as a 3. So there's both a desire to be seen and to be kind of shining, but also a desire to not be seen as having a lot of vanity or self-importance. So it's like I want attention, but I don't want anybody to know that I want attention. Is basically
right.
The dance that I'm doing. But it comes from like the deep unconscious fear underneath it all for me is a fear that I am not valuable outside of what I do or produce.
Yeah. And so taking a look at that has been what has continued to bring you into your essence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huge.
Well, while we're on those heart types, I like maybe doing the 9 types, but and heart, head, and body. I think that's a great way. So you talked about you as a 3 and that underlying piece. I think I've seen you write something too before about you're a Lamborghini, or how do you say that? You talk about something about we're a Lamborghini, but we actually don't actually let ourselves drive in the world like a Lamborghini. So I'm messing it up, but it's a beautiful way you write. Gosh.
It's so funny because now I'm like, what was the metaphor exactly? Why did I use the Lamborghini again? I think it was that we all have such a range of capacity in us, and yet we limit ourselves by saying these are the only strategies that we can use. So it would be like being a Lamborghini, but not being allowed to go over 60 miles an hour. And what the Enneagram does is it shows you how you're actually putting yourself under constraints, and you can set yourself free. So the Enneagram is really about setting yourself free. In fact, I pulled up a quote on my other screen here as we were talking a minute ago, because so much of this really is about taking what's unconscious and making it conscious. And, Steph, you were talking about the leader that you met with and the fact that she's conscious of her fear as a 6, which we'll define, means that she can work with it more consciously. It's not going to run her. So there's a quote from Carl Jung that I love: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So all of us are being driven by our personality strategies. But if we're not aware of it, then we just think like, well, that's just how I am. Or maybe this just happened to me instead of it being a part of you that you can actually work with.
Right. Like we're not bringing up these shadow parts of ourselves to stay in a quote unquote dark place. We're bringing them up to see the essence actually in that, to see through that, and to be able to love those parts of ourselves that have kept us safe, and also give them some permission to ease up a little so that we can drive like a Lamborghini.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I love the compassion and what you said, that it's not about rejecting or hating parts of ourselves. It's actually about embracing them as that has had a function in keeping me safe. Thank you. And you're not in charge. I get to decide when I use that part of me.
Right.
And that goes back to our friend Paul Wyman that you've referenced a couple times and his great work on parts. But
Absolutely. Yes. We've got another podcast or actually a YouTube video on that. But going back to our 9 types in the heart, we talked about 3. And so 2 and 4 are also part, in the heart area. What are just some basic distinctions of those 2 from the 3, which you are intimately familiar with as being a 3?
Right. So a type 2 is a type that really wants to be important to others. So it's sometimes called the befriender, sometimes called the helper, although some 2s will tell you, it's not so much about helping, it's more about winning affection from other people. So that might just be, listening or showing up or adding value in some way. Type 4s want to be seen as unique and special. And what that can often lead to for them is a comparing against other people and how other people are or what they have, and feeling like they come up lacking. And so that creates a sense of suffering or melancholy that defines a lot of their relationship to themselves and the world.
So their work is to find their Lamborghini, is to work through those things. Yeah.
It's like being willing to be ordinary, or seeing the positive in yourself instead of only seeing what's missing.
Yeah. Sound much easier said than done, right? Especially when that's what's
Yeah.
driving your safety. Yeah. Well, what about the body type, Stephanie? You're in the body type. So, maybe let's talk about those 3 types a little bit and how they're similar and how they're different.
Maybe Claire, give the kind of the overview of the 3, and then I can do a double click on the 8.
Yeah, that'd be lovely. So the body triad, oftentimes a lot of people who are body types but don't know the Enneagram would not guess that they're body types, because especially in our Western culture, we're just all really disconnected from our bodies. But what it means is you are more than the average person, grounded in the here and now and the concreteness of your body. There's more of a 2 feet on the ground, a focus on what needs to be done here, and a tuning into the gut instinct and acting from gut instinct. So Stephanie will talk more about type 8, but it's essentially a type that wants to be strong and not be weak, not be taken advantage of. So their work is to get in touch with their vulnerability. Type 9s are actually quite different from type 8s, even though they're right next to them on the circle. Type 9s are sometimes called the peacemaker or the mediator, but they essentially want to have peace and harmony in their environment and in the context around them and their relationships. And that often leads to merging too much with the outside world and losing track of themselves and their own agenda and their own strength. And then type 1s, they want to do right, to be good. And so there's this focus on what's wrong in the situation, or maybe what's wrong in me that I need to make right. So there's a real need for integrity and kind of good behavior that drives a lot of 1s, and a strong inner critic comes out of that.
Mm-hmm. So how do you relate to that, Stephanie, as an 8?
Absolutely. I mean, I think before I understood kind of where those different kind of centers were, I think I would have said, well, I'm in my mind. I'm a thinker. I think about things, but I absolutely now see how deeply things are in that gut feeling, that kind of whole body experience. Now that I am more aware and trying to be more intentional to pay attention to what's happening, there are physical sensations I have all the time around different situations where, we all engage our anxiety in our bodies and stuff, but there's communication that's coming to me through how I feel all the time. And I think I was just very unaware of it for a long time, which I think for an 8, as the challenger we're sometimes called, or people who are very quick to push back on the status quo and the things that don't seem to make sense to us, or whatever those things look like. I see all those things in my life. My subtype is social, so I'm really oriented towards people. And so an 8 that's in the other 2 subtypes would come across probably pretty differently than me. In fact, I think when I talk about the Enneagram with others who are aware of it, their first impression of me is not that I'm an 8, because of that social orientation and the sense that at the core of who I am, I'm self-protective, and I want to not be vulnerable, and I need to deal with those emotions are deeper for me than other people, and I need to pull them up to the surface. But a lot of that energy goes towards feeling protective of other people. and feeling, yesterday a friend told me some news that was supposed to, I think I should have felt sad or maybe even like scared for her, but I got angry. Like I was like, what? You need a second opinion, but I'm aware, like, as that's happening, I'm going, wow, like, here comes the challenger. Like, no, you need to get a second opinion. And what's going on there, that's my first feeling that's coming up from my gut to respond to her. And, what she also needed from me was to actually say like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, that's really hard. And to show her that compassion. And so because I'm so oriented towards people, I can use that as a way of motivating myself to dig deeper, to say, well, what's really going on and what really does this other person need the best version of myself to come and show up in that space. But a lot of times anger as a secondary emotion is the thing that comes to the surface quickly for me. And now I've learned to say, okay, what's actually the primary or deeper emotion that's coming from? And a lot of times it's sad or scared. And those feelings were just really distant in my first half of life, where I couldn't even tell you what those feelings were. And now a lot easier to find and to bring to the surface. So wonderful thing to be somebody who wants to be a defender of the vulnerable, but to be able to actually show up and choose that versus it comes out without the thought behind it, to be able to be an asset, like Claire said, to choose that when it's helpful for myself and others, and to be able to allow other parts of myself come to the surface. I mean, since I turned 35 or 40, I cry more. There's way more emotions that come to the surface, but that's all been really intentional because those are pretty deep. And I almost always am having to choose to let those come out, where for others, they're saying, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm getting emotional. For me, it's, well, I am choosing to let those emotions come.
So there's a couple things that you're saying that are really touching to me. One is when we talk about the 1, 8, and 9 as body. Just listening to you talk, even there's a grounding in it. There's like a in my body type feeling that I get. The other thing, as you talked about all the nuances of being an 8, someone else who's an 8 might not think I'm an 8, etc. I think, and we could talk a little bit more later about this, but it talks about the Enneagram isn't something that we're using to type you. Oh, she's just an 8, and so she's going to act that way. And it's not something that someone else can really tell you who you are. There are tools to help you find your Enneagram, but this is a self-led journey too. So no one can tell you who you are. It's not about typing you. And there's just things that help us figure out what our number is. We do want people to understand more about how to find their type, how to work with their type, how to be careful of those things. The one other thing I wanted to mention, we transfer to the thinkers. I'm a thinker as a 7, but there's something that you mentioned. You were talking about the 3 different types, 1, 8, and 9. And so I'm technically not a body type, though. As a 7, when I get stressed, I go to another type, and all of us do, and it's usually a polarity. And so, like, I go to 1, and so it's really interesting. The supposed positive all the time actually goes to a really, really critical place under stress, and it's always a clue to me of what makes people mistype me as a 3 a lot. And I'm like, well. Yeah, there's these places I go when I'm stressed, and there's these other things about me that are very 7-ish, and that's one of them is where we go during stress. And so we can maybe talk more about that. But there's many different nuances of your type. So how about us thinkers, Claire and Stephanie? It's funny too, because I guess I am a thinker, but I'm a pretty emotional person. But it starts in my head first before it's in my heart. So talk just a little bit about the 6, 7, and the 5, right?
Wow.
Like the head types.
Yeah. So the head triad. So head types are very driven by a need for information, certainty, clarity. They live in the land of ideas and mental possibilities or mental information. So the way that shows up for type 5s, now this is a type that a lot of people don't hear from as much talking about the Enneagram because they tend to be more private and more quiet. So they don't reveal as much about themselves. They are the most introverted type on the Enneagram. Most of the other types can be introverted or extroverted. Pretty much most 5s would say they're introverted, but not all. But 5 is a type that is looking to feel secure and resourced by information, knowledge, energy, and time. And so they will tend to be very protective of their energy and time, and then seek to become like deeply knowledgeable or expert about a number of topics. And that makes them feel safe and ready to face the world. Type 6s, as Steph mentioned earlier, the friend and fellow pastor she was talking to yesterday was a 6. So fear is a good descriptor for that type. It's a type that is really driven by a need to feel secure and safe and know, like, who can I trust? Who can I not? What can I trust? Who should I align myself with? And, depending on subtype, that might show up a number of different ways. Type 6 is one of those types that's really common, first of all, and the manifestation of it can be so different. So you have self-preservation 6s, for instance, that really seek to make alliances with others. And they're kind of the most nice, warm 6. Whereas the 1-to-1, or sometimes called the sexual 6, is a very brash, bold, almost 8-ish type 6, because they are trying to deny their anxiety and fear and rise above it. So that's just to give you a flavor of how different these types can really show up.
Yeah.
And then you talked about type 7 already, but yeah, looking for possibilities, like new experiences. Don't limit me, don't fence me in. And ultimately, it's a need to avoid being stuck in uncomfortable emotions, whether that's fear or sadness or pain.
Yeah. Yes. Wanting freedom. I mean, you see like the Nepal prayer flags behind me in the mountains. I mean, I'm definitely one that seeks lots of experiences. And I mentioned that like the stress part of me goes over into the body type. The essence side of all, we all have our essence side as well.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about, like, for me, like for a 7, it's a 5. And that's a lot of like very different to the actual external personality of a 7. However, there's a sense of peace through a 7 coming to 5, that 7s, I can feel it. It's hard for me to describe it, but I don't always walk through with all my big ideas with that sense of peace. And there's something about the 5 who seems very opposite of a 7, and yet it's a road to essence. Can you speak to those two different angles, not just a 7, but of where we go during stress, where we go for what I call essence? You might use different terminology.
Right. Yeah, this is such a great topic for us to cover, because kind of like people are mistyped. I was taught that we may not always be getting the full story on the arrow lines, which is what you're referring to when you say like 7 is connected to 5 and 1. So for our listeners, you can't see the Enneagram symbol, in our faces, but if you were to Google it right now, you would see this circle. And every number on the Enneagram has an arrow line pointing away from it towards another number, and an arrow line pointing towards it from another number. And so some Enneagram teachers teach that you go one direction in stress and one direction in essence or security, or like kind of your positive manifestation. What I was taught, and I have found to be really profound in practice and application with leaders that I coach, is you can actually go to the low side or the high side of either of those numbers. So I always think type 1 is a great example to use here. So type 1, this is the one that's kind of like perfectionist, needs to get it right. The arrow that points to them is point 7. So that's what Renelle is, like kind of fun-loving, experiential. And then the 4 arrow is what points away from them, or the 1 points to 4. And that's the one that wants to feel unique and special and kind of connected to themselves and find meaning. And so a 1 could look like an unhealthy 7, like kind of maybe getting lost in leisure activities in an unhealthy way, because they're so stressed that they just escape. Like, honestly, it could be like a drinking problem, for instance, might come up. Or the high side of 7 of being like fun loving and just like, let's just see what happens today. So that would be a 1 kind of getting out of their rigid box. They can go to the low side of 4 as well. They could look like kind of moody or self-absorbed, or they can go to the high side of 4. But here's the crux of what I want to say is this is how you use the arrows for development. Because like I said, just finding out your type is the beginning. It's really using the system to unhook from your type. So a type 1 can use the arrows as growth pathways. And how that would work is, if I'm a 1, I need to go back to 7 because the 7 arrow points to 1. I need to go back to 7 and reclaim something that I left behind in childhood because it didn't feel safe. So for type 1s, that means I need to go back and reclaim my ability to be lighthearted, to have fun, to be kind of frivolous and selfish. And so if I do that work of reintegrating what I left behind in childhood, it positions me now to do the work to go to the arrow of 4. And what that means for a 1 is instead of just doing my duty, I'm going to be in touch with my authentic self, with like my true desires, like the truest expression of who I am. And I'm going to be able to live out of that as well. So it's not like I become a 7 and then become a 4. It's I'm a 1 who is broadening the range of how I can be in the world. And the Enneagram, kind of the magic of the Enneagram is it's built into the system to give you kind of this perfect balancing point. You know, if I integrate the 7 and the 4, it's like the perfect antidote or alchemy, you know, to help my oneness be in its healthiest expression.
Yeah, yeah. And I would almost say, I was thinking, as you were saying that, I was like, where do I need to go back and claim some of my oneness, like a different way of
It's
looking
actually
at that?
for you, it would be 5.
Yeah. Oh,
For
it would
you,
be
it would be 5.
It would be 5. Okay, I need to go back
Yeah,
to
you would
some
go
of my-
back to childhood and integrate 5. So that
Yeah.
might be a fun little journal exercise for you later.
Looks like we're going to have to end now. I've got some work to do. No, just kidding. So as you can see, we have either enthralled you with our conversation or possibly confused you a little bit. We hope that we've enthralled you. There's so much to the Enneagram. Claire, Stephanie, why are we choosing to use this particular? Yes, it's a tool, but it's more of a way of seeing the world to transform, to do transformative work with leaders. How do we use it? Why do we choose to use it with leaders?
What would you say,
Going
Claire?
to speak to that, Steph?
I can go first if you
Not
want.
it.
Not it. You got it. You know, I think it comes back to treating the whole person as the leader. The leader is the whole person. It's not just the person that shows up when they're with their team or when they're leading a meeting or up front or sending emails through Teams. Like we are whole people everywhere that we are. And if we're going to show up well as leaders, then we need to be people who can show up healthy and well for ourselves and for the other people in our lives. And I just think of the best leaders are going to be those who have integrated themselves in all aspects of their life so that when they're coming to the spaces where they have responsibility, they're choosing to bring the best version of themselves for that moment. But without that knowledge of yourself in a holistic way, and without that ability to have that consciousness and think through the ways you have shown up and the ways you'd like to, it's not just a I hope to be better. I mean, I've seen that so many times for leaders just say, "Well, I'm going to just do better next time." It's like, no, that's just not going to work. If we don't do that deeper work, that is going to be what is going to determine our outcomes, and we're going to call it fate, like the quote that Claire read. So I think for the leaders that I lead, and even for just my congregation, for humans, to be able to live the fullest life, and for me as a person of faith, the life that I think God created people for, we have this lifetime of discovering deeper understandings of ourselves and how we relate to others and how we relate to God and to the divine, however people define that. And so it's a beautiful experience of discovery that I would want for everybody that I love. It's not an easy one, but I have found the choice not to do that discovery is not an easy road either. It just determines how that outcome's going to be. So if we want to care well for the people that we're leading, I think we have to be willing to do this work. And this tool is the best one that I can think of to do that well. There's many other great tools that Claire works with, but to me, it's a starting place, and a core understanding that even the other assessments that have been done on me as a leader, like I understand them through my understanding of myself in my Enneagram, my type, but also in the ways in which I engage through the other types and with other people who are typed in different ways. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie.
I'll just layer on that I hate the word shortcut because I think it sounds cheap and like the easy way out, but I'm going to use it anyway because I can't think of a better way to describe what I think the Enneagram can do for us in our development, our leadership development. It's like a shortcut to deeply understanding yourself, other people, accepting and having appreciation for who you are and how other people are wired, but not feeling stuck in that. It is like a decoder ring that I think in coaching a leader, if I didn't have something like the Enneagram, it might take me 6 sessions to uncover like what's really driving that behavior, what's really the fear underneath that. And it's so unconscious that even me asking those questions don't get the answer to surface. But showing someone these 9 types, at the simplest level, no assessment, nothing. Just sometimes I just have a client read about the 9 types and they say, "Ooh, it's probably either like an 8 or a 5."
Yeah.
And then, well, let's look at those a little deeper. And then we know, okay, now we have a kind of a roadmap because thousands of humans before you have said, this is what it's like to be me. And that has emerged as this patterned way of being human and how the soul can manifest in human form. And I think that's really fascinating that we don't have to figure all that out ourselves. Yes, we are all unique. And yes, there are patterns in how humans are wired and how we show up and defend ourselves. And then there are patterns for how we get out of that path and get unstuck. And we can take advantage of what has already been discovered through the Enneagram about that work.
I love that. And I think about the different ways that I've used the Enneagram with clients, and sometimes it is the thing that unlocks something for them. So, one of the tools I think that Claire and I both use is called the Leadership Circle, which is a 360 where other people assess and we talk about moving from reactive to creative leadership, becoming more conscious leaders. But the Enneagram is the theoretical underpinning of some of these reactive strategies. And so sometimes um, if we're doing the leadership circle, I will still pull that in because it really helps people see those patterns even clearer. And then, we might be doing the individual work with somebody using the leadership circle, but we can bring the Enneagram in to teams. Not that we can't bring the leadership circle in, but the Enneagram with teams too is like this is who I think I am and how I think I show up, and how can I help you understand me better and me understand you, and what our strengths and limitations might be, and how do we grow trust. So those are some ways we can use it too, is like we're developing ourselves, and then we're also developing these collective communities around us.
Yeah, beautiful.
What other ways do you all use it? And then I would like to talk about the different types of tools before we
Mhm.
end as well.
Yeah. Yeah, Steph, do you want to say anything about how, as a leader with a team, you've seen the Enneagram be helpful for your team, or other ways you've used it in your role? And then I can talk about as a coach how I see it used in orgs.
Yeah,
That's great.
absolutely. I mean, I think for a healthy team, there is that kind of, as Claire described, that sense of understanding yourself, but also understanding others. And then the next step, which is to uh, embrace other people's differences. And we have kind of a bias towards ourselves and thinking other people think the same way that we do, understand the world the same way we do. And what the Enneagram has done for the teams that I lead has opened up this immediate question of, wait, how are they experiencing this? I wonder about that. That curiosity of the other and that wondering changes the questions you ask, the ways you engage with each other, the patience that you can have for each other, and the understanding. So when my team has every number is a part of my team except for one right now, and it's an interesting thing to see that, and yet that's exactly what you want from a team is a diverse group
Yeah.
of people in every aspect, including personality, that are bringing who they are to the table. And it's not possible to have a perfectly safe table for people to bring their whole self to, but I often talk about how can it be as psychologically safe as possible, but also that it's a brave space,
I love
which
that.
is kind of a Brene Brown term, like that you show up with your whole self to the best of your ability. Sometimes that means being honest that you can't show up with your whole self today, and you're just sharing that with the group or with me as their supervisor or something like that. It creates just a deep understanding. My team is really well versed in Enneagram to the point where they use that in their own vernacular. I talk with people about being very careful about using it towards somebody else. So well, you're a this, so that means, and just
Yeah.
saying, hey, let people self-identify and describe things, or you can ask them. So, oh, as a the 3, how are you experiencing this? But most of the time, my team will use the Enneagram to talk about, to make it conscious to themselves and to the group how they're experiencing something. So someone might say something like, well, I'm having a tough time, dealing with that news because as a 6, all I can think of is what's going to go wrong. So I'm just going to say that out loud. Like someone will say something like that to help the whole group like slow down and realize, okay, because I hadn't thought of anything that I thought would go wrong or, hey, you know what? We've actually talked about those things. Let's go through what those are.
Yeah.
Or, you know what? You're going to be the best person to come up with the frequently asked questions for this because everyone's going to want to know. And so how can you help us start there? And using the people's gifts and strengths in that way. But then, of course, for me, leading people, like I mentioned earlier, I'm leading them holistically. I want to be someone who, as a pastor, I'm a spiritual guide. And so asking them questions, encouraging them to go deeper with their own understanding of themselves so that they can be the healthiest and the closest to their Lamborghini as possible on the team, but also in their personal lives and in their relationships and their interpersonal relationships. As we all know, if people are struggling in different aspects of their life with their parenting or their marriage or their, even in their own mental health, they're going to struggle to show up in their workplace. And so I have found that acknowledging that those other parts of them exist. It's not like the TV show Severance on Apple TV right now, where you have a work version of yourself and an at-home version of yourself. You might show up different in your workplace. I hope you do than you do to your family or your kids. But how are you having agency in that and able to do that from a place that's centered and more grounded? I want that for my team. That's going to be the best way that we relate to each other. And we're modeling for a community of people how we love each other well as leaders too. So it's critical in that way. And so finding ways to make sure that it's a tool that's helpful, not when I like that Claire used it as idea of a shortcut, but making it too much of a shortcut would be when you're saying, oh, well, they're a 6, so they're never going to be able to overcome their fear for this. Or, oh, that person's an 8, so they're never going to really be vulnerable with us.
Yeah, that goes back to saying, let's not type people. Yeah.
And even if we know their type and they've shared that with us, it's not something to be used. In my mind, the tool is to either validate someone's experience and how they've developed the personality that they have, which I find the Enneagram to be so validating, just in time to say, okay, it's validated me and how I got here, but what's next for me is to say, what is my responsibility in being a human citizen here for the good of others to consider myself and like what I need to work through. And so that to me, like that's so much in work of coaching and pastoring is like you get people to a spot where they feel so validated and comfortable and at home and understanding so that you can push them to the place of being uncomfortable because that's actually going to lead to the deepest growth in their life.
Which goes to some coaching too, right? How we use it in coaching as well.
Coaching is, exactly.
Totally.
So,
well, and
it's so harmful if you use it against somebody and boxing them in. We wouldn't ever want that.
And as we have to, I don't want to wrap up, but we have to wrap up soon. But I do want to hear, Claire, how do we use it in coaching as well? Mm-hmm. And then we might just want to talk a little bit. I want to end again with some of what you said about the tools. There are some, like we can all share what tools we use, but also to be careful about seeing it as a tool. Like in coaching, how do you use it?
I've started using it just as a automatic, like we're going to do the Enneagram, whether it's an assessment or we just kind of look at it together and do a typing interview. It's so helpful. And it's not the centerpiece of the coaching, but once we establish it, it can inform, how they're forming coaching goals and what's important about that to you, what could get in the way. And then as they bring examples of real life interactions they've had, it's like, well, how did your 7-ness show up in that? What would it look like to use your arrow? So using some things that I know about the complexity of the Enneagram and how to pick one part of it that's relevant to the client and what they're facing right now has been an important part of my training and application of this. Is like not trying to boil the ocean with it, but using one element of the Enneagram that speaks to their current situation and their coaching goals. And then I use it with teams, do team offsites. I build it into leadership development programs as well. Did I answer your questions, or was there another part of what you asked?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to make sure that people
Tools.
had an understanding, of how we use it with teams, what it means to use it as a leader, to be part of a team, to be a coach. If if someone wants to use it with you in coaching, or how you might be able to utilize that. So that I just wanted to bring that all home. There are a lot of tools out there. So before we end, we just want to just re-clarify that it's not right. It's not like I think I use because I use it so holistically. Like I use one of the older tools, the Riso Hudson, one of the old, not older, but one of the originals that just really trying to get to the essence. But there are other tools, and Claire, I've seen you write about these that I'm really interested in learning about. Maybe I could use some different angles. So there's so many different ways. So if we could just touch on a few of those, and then we'll have to say goodbye. We could talk about the Enneagram all day.
I know. And I do have to wrap in the next 2 minutes, so I will talk quickly. I would recommend, yes, the Riso Hudson work is so good. It's kind of the OG Enneagram. So Enneagram Institute came out of that. The Blue Book, which is called The Wisdom of the Enneagram, is a really great resource.
I love that book.
I was taught by Beatrice Chestnut and Uranio Paez at the CP Enneagram Academy, and they have a website, cpenneagram.com. What I do love about their work is they have really gone deep on the subtypes in a way that I think the Blue Book in its first edition, at least, didn't capture. Although now I from what I understand, Russ Hudson has said, yep, totally on board with like this understanding of the subtypes. But I mention that because some of the assessments that are out there don't account for the subtypes, and that's why people end up mistyped. So I would say if you want an assessment that's close to accurate, again, always check it against your own instincts. I think the IEQ9 is a really good one. And I use the CPS Enneagram Compass, which comes out of the CP Enneagram Academy School. But again, that website, CP Enneagram, is a great place to go and learn about each type in depth. Books I love besides the Blue Book. I love Beatrice Chestnut's The Complete Enneagram. And then Beatrice and her partner, Uranio, wrote a book together that actually is now the one that I first give to clients. And it's called The Enneagram Guide to Waking Up, because it's just a really simple read. It's more bullet points than textbook. And it's all about how do you use the Enneagram for growth. So it's not as much of a resource guide to the in-depth complexities of the system as it is an application guide.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for being on the show today. As you can see, the Enneagram is such an amazing way to see the world, way to develop, and something so needed as we continue to walk through a really uncertain world. The more we can get clear with ourselves and those around us, the more we can walk these paths, these uncertain paths together. So thank you both so much. I will put more information about you in the show notes. And so Claire, you write about the Enneagram some, so I'll be sure people can find that as well. So
yeah, and Steph has a podcast.
Oh, yes.
So make sure you link that too.
That's right, Steph. So I'll link your podcast as well as if there's any other things that pertain to the Enneagram or how you use it, we'll link that just so people can have access to that. So thank you both so much for being here today. I greatly appreciate it. And here's to the wisdom of the ages and the Enneagram. For more information, visit insight-cc.com or email us at info@insight-cc.com. We look forward to hearing from you.